I'm just saying. It's an
Well,
offer.
we're already live. So.
Oh, we're live. Heck yeah.
Oh, and he joined. Okay.
Oh, perfect. Sweet.
Hello.
Hello?
What's
Yeah.
up?
There we go.
Also, don't worry about him being 7,000 followers. He's wearing a banana costume, so he's not that
Clearly
serious.
I don't take myself seriously, so don't worry.
Okay. Well, before we start, like, I need to make clear whose voice is who.
Oh. This is my voice. I'm hungry. The guy who invited.
Okay, yeah, you are the guy with the deep voice who sounds kind of like Mindria. Okay, got it. Okay, and the other guy is.
I'm Kennedy.
Kennedy. Okay, yeah. I'm Chris. You just call me Chris.
Nice to meet you, Chris.
Nice to meet you as well.
Okay. Anyway, since we're live, I think we should start now.
Sure.
Sure. Let's go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Thorns and Roses, and right now, this is just the introduction. Basically, to tell you what this is going to be a discussion between a someone representing the European right, and someone representing the American left. I did this for a small perspective area because I normally when you think of politics, you think of Europeans being leftists and Americans being rightists. So I decided to switch things up a little. Anyway, so I'll let the two first introduce each other, then we can begin.
Do you want to go first, or I will? Otherwise.
Oh wait, what the fuck?
Okay, I guess I'll go. I'm Kennedy Cooper. I'm one of the hosts of a show called Not Safe for Wonks. We do politics and comedy and different stuff, and I'm I don't necessarily always have like a really strong, like overwhelming attitude towards like specific ideologies all the time in terms of like where I fall. Like I support a lot of left-wing movements and progressive ideas, and I'm not necessarily like super attached to any one movement in particular, but I would consider myself, like, if you push me for my ideology, like pretty far left. And like I've definitely read some Marx. I've read some anarchist theory. I disagree with parts of some of it. I agree with parts of some of it. It's kind of a complicated topic, but that's kind of where I fall politically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Chris, you ready?
Yeah. First of all, I didn't even realize we had a camera on, so I can turn on my camera real quick. Hold on. I did not know we were gonna have the camera on, so hold on. I'm just gonna turn on my camera.
You don't have to if you don't want to.
No. If you guys are doing it, I can do it as well. There we go.
Okay.
Awesome.
There we go. Thank you. Anyways, so yeah, hello. I'm Meet Chris, so you can just call me Chris. I own a YouTube channel called Meet Chris, but I don't upload as much as I do. As much as I used to. I can make mapping videos, although it's disputable if I still make them. Anyways, I mean, it is said that I represent the European right, but I mean, I already told you this, but I don't necessarily associate myself with European right. I mean, usually when the European right and European left argue with each other, I usually try to side with the right, but I don't associate myself with them. I mean, I like a lot of their policy, especially on social issues, which is, I guess, is why I represent the European right, because we'll talk about social issues, not economic, because in economics, I am actually more to the left. And also, I also don't classify myself as a right wing. I classify myself as a neo-fascist, but not what's it called? Not the far right Nazi movements which exist both in Europe and America. I think that associating a group with what their color of skin is or where they're from is stupid. I represent the old classical Italian fashion, even if I disagree even some points with Italian fashion, such as the empire thing. I don't really think we need an empire anymore. But besides that, I align myself more with a new classic Italian fashion, and try to distance myself from those National Socialists. Anyway, so yeah, that's what I would classify myself as.
Okay, so as you can see, we got some two interesting people here. And so I think the first topic of discussion would probably be a discussion that has affected both the American and European issues, and that would be neighbors to the south. Right now, both America and Europe have the immigration issues, with America having multiple immigration from a lot of the um, from Central America and Mexico, and Europe has a lot of is getting a lot of migration from the North African, Middle Eastern region. So I want to ask you two, how do you think Europe and America should focus on immigration issues? I'll let you go first, Chris, because
Okay, well, I'll start with Europe. Now, the thing is, there's two different types of migration coming to Europe right now. There is the refugees, which mostly come from Syria or Iraq, and then there are the economic immigrants, which mostly come from African countries, which are not necessarily in conflict, but have a bad social and economic status. Now, I've different opinions on both of these types of immigration. On economic immigration, if it's illegal, like they come on the boats from Libya or Tunisia to Sicily, and they come for economic reasons, then I think they should not be allowed to enter. Because I think if your only problem is that you have a bad economic situation, then I don't think you should have the benefit to come in here, I'll say, illegally without going through the process. However, if you come as a what's it called, a refugee, there's a different issue, and this is actually where I differ myself from a lot of both right wingers and a lot of classical neo-fascists, what do you call it, Italian neo-fascists, because a lot of them say they want to close down all illegal immigration, no matter if it's refugees or economic immigrants. And I don't know if why I think different, maybe because I'm also Catholic, so I have a little bit of, I don't know, empathy for people. But I think if they are refugees and they are escaping from war, then I think they should at least have, what's it called, temporary asylum in European countries. But first, they also must prove. I mean, they must be proven that they actually are refugees, because a lot of refugees claim they are refugees, but not actually are refugees. So, but if you are a refugee and you're escaping from war, then you should have temporary asylum in a European country, whichever it is. Now, when it comes to and also when it comes to actual to immigrants who want to stay, let's say in Italy or Sweden, as I say myself, I'm not a racialist. I don't really care what skin color you have or where you're from. However, I am a nationalist. I believe that if these immigrants, whether they're legal or illegal, if they want to move to a European country, I believe they should try to assimilate themselves into the society. Then I believe they can stay, and if they want to contribute to the country as well. When it comes to the U.S., that's really hard, because the thing is, I don't keep myself up that much with American politics, but so it's kind of hard for me to actually have a clear point on on where immigration should stand in America when regarding that. The thing is, I don't know what to think. You know what? Can I come back to the American immigration after I heard Kennedy's point of view on
okay,
it? I actually would like to do that. Yeah.
okay, I'll let Kennedy then give his views.
Yeah.
So I think immigration is really often used as a smokescreen issue to sort of distract from more important issues. I think that there was a long history in this country where quote unquote illegal immigration didn't exist in the way that we think of it now. Not that people weren't crossing the border quote unquote illegally, but we weren't classifying it the same way legally. It was not treated as a major problem or a major offense. And basically, if you came to this country quote unquote illegally, and you didn't create any problems for anyone, and you were discovered to be here without a visa or a permit or some kind of something allowing you to be here, then basically you would be asked to rectify that, and that would be it. It wouldn't be like a big deal. It would, and that worked fine for us for literally hundreds of years in this country. And immigration only became an issue in order, in my opinion, to distract from real economic issues, because the number of immigrants that are sort of quote unquote weighing down the economy in a lot of people's minds here, like that's not true. There's no economic basis to that. Study after study shows that first of all, it's not as many people as some people believe. Second of all, the people that we're talking about contribute to the economy. They don't detract from the economy, they contribute. And so I think that like the whole issue of immigration often gets made into like this really big thing, and I don't think it should be that at all. I think it's all a big distraction from like more important issues. And also like sort of in response to Chris a little bit, I think I'm kind of interested to discuss a little bit like why is an economic refugee not just as valid as any other type, would be one question that I have for you. Because in my opinion, somebody who's fleeing a type of economic violence, that's as real as any other type of violence, right? If you are fleeing a country where the economy is completely designed to just screw you in particular for some reason, maybe you live in a extremely repressive country that is not kind to LGBT people and you're homosexual, right? Like you are at an economic disadvantage in that country that is not, it may not be considered like, you're in a war zone, but a type of economic warfare is being done to you every day because you can't like operate in the normal economic system. And so seeking to flee that type of violence to me is just as valid as anything else. And also I would kind of also like to question a little bit like your thoughts about temporariness, because it seems to me if people the concept of home is very powerful, and like people deserve, in my opinion, to be able to go somewhere and be safe. And especially a refugee, I think it's very cruel in some ways to tell a refugee, sure, you're safe here for now, but as soon as the government decides your time is up, your time is up. And a lot of times, like here in our country, in America, there have been many cases where we've told people their time is up while the country that they fled is still clearly unsafe. And that sending back to them back to that country is asking them to go into an unsafe situation. And, I think if people like are fleeing fear and violence and horrible things that like, I mean, I've never experienced anything as horrible as most people who are fleeing their country, right? Like, I just period, right? Like it doesn't even compare. The things that these people are fleeing, I think it's very cruel in a way to tell them, well, your stay here is temporary. We'll see. I think it's, these people deserve a chance to make a home somewhere. And I think even from your perspective of nationalism, if you want these people to be invested in your country, welcoming them and telling them this can be your home too, just seems logical to me. So I don't know, maybe you can tell me what you think.
Okay, well, I'll start with the first question. I say yes, economical immigrants. I mean, when we say economic immigrants, it's not, they're having like a small problems back in their home countries. Like when I mean economic immigrants, a lot of them do have, crushing problems which they cannot resolve and which are, damaging their life on a big level. However, the thing is, I still believe that, refugees who escape from war where they are literally being threatened that they can be killed by a gun or artillery or whatever, a bomb. I think that is still more serious than somebody who is having big economical issues back in their homes. Sure, I'm not saying that just because the asylum seeker is having it bigger problems doesn't mean we should ignore the economical immigrants. But it also is that I believe it would be unfair to take in people who have economic immigrants. I think it would be unfair for them to take them in because the thing is, if we look at the continent of Africa, I mean, like most nations have it pretty rough, and that is and why it is like that can also be discussed. But the thing is, if we were to take in every person who has economical struggles in Africa, they wouldn't all fit in Europe. They wouldn't all fit. You cannot just abandon an entire continent. Now, what I would propose for that is that we Europeans not colonize Africa, but we Europeans try to help Africans. Mostly because because Africa needs to be stable if the world is gonna continue in the future. And how we're gonna fix Africa is an entirely different comment. Also, because we Europeans are partially to be blamed for the problems in Africa. But as I said, to fix that, I believe we should try to help the Africans in a way to benefit us and them. But yeah, I don't think we should take in every economic immigrant, because no matter how hard the problems are, all of them can fit in Europe. And just taking some of them in and leaving some of them out, I feel will be a bit unfair. Now, to the other question regarding temporary asylum. The thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, when you seek asylum somewhere, isn't it supposed to be temporary? You're hiding from something, and somebody lets you in lets you in, so you can temporarily hide or escape the problems that you're having. Now, the thing is, I think you can come to a sort of a compromise, understand, because I don't know if I made myself enough clear, but. Or I forgot to say this, but obviously, when asylum seekers come to Europe, it's not like, okay, you're escaping from a war in Syria. Okay, here's your new home. I don't think we should do that. However, I don't think it should be like this. Okay, you're escaping from war. Welcome to Italy, but you're gonna leave eventually. I think it should be temporary, but it doesn't have to be temporary. If let's say a Syrian family comes into Italy, and first they come in temporary, but if they truly do want to be assimilated into the Italian culture, the Italian nation, and be a part of Italy and contribute to it, then obviously they should be able to seek permanent residence in Italy, but it should begin with temporary. Then, depending how it goes, they can either go back to the nation when it's been fixed, or seek permanent residence in Italy. And also, when it comes to that, when you said that they sometimes are being sent, even if the situation is still it's not fixed. Well, if that's the case, then it's the government's fault, and the government must be replaced if they're doing the wrong decision of sending back people to a warring country when it has not been fixed yet. So yeah, that's my answer to it. Yeah.
Well, I definitely appreciate you pointing out that that's a failure of the government. I agree there. That's something I think we can definitely agree upon. I think something though, like when you talk about like a asylum and you say it's supposed to be temporary, I think that's a really interesting thing to kind of dive into a little bit, because that's something that we definitely have heard from American and European governments in recent decades. But first of all, the supposed meaning of any political concept is what we agree it is, right? Like, I would you somewhat agree with that statement, that like if we agree that asylum means blank, then it means blank, right? Like it's all kind of like down to how we treat it, how we treat these concepts. And asylum at different points in history has kind of meant different things in different places. So I think I don't think I can really agree with the statement that it's supposed to be temporary. I think that if someone is seeking asylum, they don't know a lot of the time if or when they'll ever be able to return necessarily, right? I mean, some people's countries go into a situation that never resolves in their lifetime, right? Like, especially like if you're seeking asylum, you're already 40 or 50. You don't even have but so many decades left to see through your country, going through whatever it's going through. So I think, I do have to push back just a little bit on the idea personally that like asylum is supposed to be a certain way. In my opinion, it's kind of whatever we make it. And I think that there's the problem with what you're describing isn't that it doesn't sound okay, but the problem is that realistically, when these things are not, when things are sort of left to these like if this and then maybe this and then this kind of systems, all too often what happens is what you said, the government fails. The government fails the people who needed the help the most. When these systems they equivocate, they have lots of corner cases and clauses and this and that, then like those clauses leave people in the dark that don't deserve it, that didn't deserve to be left out in the cold, that needed a safe place to be. And in many cases, like I know here in America, and I'm not trying to speak for Italy exactly because I don't know everything about your country, of course, but just definitely here in America, there have been many cases where asylum seekers have built whole lives here and become parts of community and then been told you can't stay. And again, we agree that that's a failure of the government, but what I'm kind of pushing back on is why is the government failing? And I think unless we reframe the way that we think about these things really significantly and kind of like push back on some of these ideas about the way things sort of have to be or the way things are supposed to be, I think that there's some potential there to sort of like, I don't know, change the way that we look at things. So I'll let you respond to that if you want.
Yeah. So I believe, if you know what my ideas are, I believe that one of the most tragic things that can happen to a society is when the state or the government fails you, because I think that's probably the most dangerous situation that can happen to a society. Like if the state if you cannot trust the government and the state, then you're a failed nation. That's just how it is, and that's why I see, as when we see both America and many European governments, how they have failed their people. Like that's what I see as the most grave situation. That's why I want them to be changed. But however, how you said, if a situation happens like this, like you described, an immigration, a family which has escaped war in some country, doesn't matter what country it is, and they have built up a family, whatever it's in the US or in Italy, then they get sent back home, like they want to stay in the country, and they have assimilated or integrated, and then they're being sent back home. I believe that is a big failure, but if that's the case, they should be able to seek permanent residence. And also, I believe that they should be temporary at the beginning, because realistically, if we let in people, I'm looking at it as like both at a social and an economical point of view. If we let in every people who are escaping from war and giving them immediate permanent residence, I believe that is not sustainable, because theoretically, let's put that Syria has a civil war, so they all go to Italy, and then you say like this, then Ethiopia has a civil war, then they all go to Italy, and then Italy has so many people, so they go to civil war. They must, like, you cannot just abandon a nation, like, because the thing is, we are already extremely overpopulated, and if we just abandon nations and the people transfer to another nation, I don't believe that's sustainable. Like, we must make sure that these people can go back to their homes. Now, if that is impossible, then obviously we should not send them to a death zone. They should stay in the country they're residing in. But the number one priority should be that they go back to their own homes. But if realistically, if that doesn't happen, then obviously they should stay in the residing country. I'm just looking at this at a realistically point of view. And then, as you say, if the government fails, then, well, that's too bad. Like I said, I think that's a horrible thing, and then it's up to the people to change that government, or to better the state. That's my response to it.
So I think there's a lot of things that I could address to that, but what I really want to ask you is just, I think one thing, and we may not have tons and tons of things that we agree upon, but one thing that we do obviously agree upon is that the government is failing people a lot in a lot of countries, including our own. And that it's a real tragedy of the government to fail its people. We both agree on that, right? Okay, so I'm curious just to hear from you. How do you think we prevent that? How do you think we prevent the government from failing its people?
Well, obviously, the easy answer, the short answer, is to replace the government. But the thing is, I do not believe, as you said, I do not believe. I'm a Italian neo-fascist. I do not believe that democracy works, because the thing is, it's not only because we should not let people decide the future of the country because they are stupid. It's not really because of that. It's because power, someone will always grab power. When democracy is created in a country, there's always a power vacuum which is usually filled. For example, in Italy, the power vacuum has been filled by different corrupt organizations and by mafia organizations, which truly ruled the country. Because, like, a quick example, in Italy, there was recently, well, not recently, a few years ago, there was a earthquake, which, destroyed many villages and made many people homeless. And the thing is, the government, and thanks also to the bureaucracy, it's really hard to fix situations. Like, there's still people homeless, even if this happened years ago. And, but money has been, received by both the state and by private donations. But what ended up is that a lot of this money was gone. It was, you can guess where it went, but it was gone. And that's the thing. We have a democracy, but still power is being used by other organizations, and we are doing nothing about it because we're relying on this democratic system. And the same in the US. How you say? You claim there's democracy, but there's just so much. There's so much power being influenced by big corporations, by both sides, the Democrats and the Republicans. And so, like, when you see this, I do not believe that. Oh shit! I do not believe that democracy can work. And that's why, I see myself as a Italian neo-fascist. Yeah.
Well, so I'm interested in that because if you believe that the problem with democracy is that people are going to grab power, how could any authoritarian power structure possibly be better? Because people are still going to grab power. And the example that I'll use is I think, I would agree that the democracy here in America is a joke. I don't even call it a democracy most of the time. It's a representative republic. It has some democratic features, but it's not a democracy. If we want to get into maybe a little bit about what I think actually democracy is and how that would benefit people, we can. But first, I just kind of want to talk about to use the example of, okay, so here, I agree that the government kind of sucks, isn't very democratic, isn't very accountable. However, one argument that I often make with people is that you have far more ability to engage with the very mildly democratic government than you do to engage with completely non-democratic corporations. Most of the people that I know that work for a large corporation have never met the CEO or have only met them to shake their hand one time. They have no ability to interact with that person. Whereas if you want a meeting with your mayor, that's possible. That's something that you can have. And I'm not saying that makes the system perfect. I'm just saying that there's clearly a little bit more accountability towards that than to a corporation where there's no accountability. And it when I think of authoritarian regimes, I'm sorry, but I think of absolutely no accountability whatsoever to the people in power. So when you talk about people power grabbing, I don't see how possibly a more authoritarian power structure prevents that. It just seems like the power grabbers are just going to be more entrenched than ever.
Okay. Yeah. Well, in an authoritarian government, there is no power grab because the state has the power. Because you can, if someone is corrupt,
but the state is people, right?
Yeah, the state is the people. The thing is that if a politician is corrupt in a authoritarian system, for example, this has happened in Italy, in fascist Italy, when a politician was corrupt, he was punished immediately. He was not being protected by these big mafia organizations. Under this this republic in Italy, the mafia has grown. They're not even in southern Italy anymore. They've expanded into the north and are even setting operations in other European countries. Well, during fascist Italy, the mafia organizations were completely wiped out because that's just how it is. There is no bullshitting. There is no bullshitting because even if you can talk to your mayor, in the end the decision is not being made by the people. So some policies are being changed by voting or referendums, Not to mention some referendums are also, ignored, such as many European referendums about the EU, which were ignored by their own governments. But even if some changes can be made for a democratic state, the ultimate, decision is being made by someone else. And if I had to choose between that or an authoritarian state, which has its policies made clear, and I agree with these policies, just because this is also something that many people, some people confuse. They believe I just like authoritarianism in general. I don't. Like, for example, if there's an authoritarian government and they have horrible decisions, obviously I'm not going to say, oh, yes, I love them just because they're authoritarian. I want an authoritarian government which has the right policies. And if there is an authoritarian government which has the right policies, I would much rather support them, than democratic state, which the big decisions are being made not by the people. But not only that, I mean, when I believe in authoritarian government, which I believe in, this is not like INGSOC or like 1984, where there are a group of people which decide everything and the people are all fucking clueless. Like the state, which is the people, like you said, the people can join, the state or the government to truly, if they want to change something, they do it by joining the state. The state encompasses the whole nation. And I'd rather much want this system than whatever system we have right now in the West.
Okay, well I'm going
to... I'll continue to agree that there's a lot of fundamental flaws with the way that democracy has been presented to us, and I will definitely continue to agree with you there, because I think that actual democracy, in my opinion, really does not look a lot like what we have in general, there's a lot of issues with that. I think the issue with what you're describing, in my opinion, though, is that when you say that a corrupt politician will be punished immediately. Punished by whom? Again, it's a person, and that person is potentially corruptible. My point about the state being people wasn't just that it's all of us, but also just that all of these machinations that you're describing, ultimately there are people behind them. There are people pulling these levers, and those people are still corruptible. And when you say things about this ideal state, I can see why it has a certain kind of appeal, but my concern is that what's going to happen is, okay, so let's say let's say an authoritarian state establishes all the things I want. Maybe I would be happy for a little while, right? But the problem is that if it's an authoritarian state, and like we say, we both agree that people can be corrupted by power. We're totally in agreement there. That those ideals that initially I liked, that got me to sign on to the authoritarian state, could change suddenly, and I wouldn't necessarily have a lot of ability to have recourse against that change under an authoritarian system, right? Because the thing is if you want power under the system you're describing, you have to become a part of the party, and the party could decide for any reason that, people with your beliefs, or who look like you, or who do certain things that you do, or any number of reasons, can't be in the party, and now I'm completely shut out of the process, right? I think that there's kind of even if you founded what you're describing on very idealistic terms, I think that there would always be a slippery slope that quickly led to someone questionable getting the reins of the power and corrupting the ideals. And if we wanted to give a really concrete example of this, I think the USSR is a fantastic example of a sort of people's movement where they all agreed, yes, we can have a big authoritarian government because it's going to promote our values, the values we decided. And then as soon as the people in charge started to change, those values went straight out the window. Stalin didn't give a shit about the people's movement, right? He didn't give this the tiniest care for the things that the values that the people had established that he was supposed to quote unquote uphold. So I think that if your concern is that people are corrupt and are going to grab power, I just don't see how possibly an authoritarian system isn't going to lead to a much worse scenario in that regard.
Okay.
Well,
I'm just going to say, I'll let you respond to this, but then we have to continue to a different subject.
Sure, that's fair.
Yeah, I'll just respond, then we can go to a new subject. Yeah, sure. Now, the thing is, this I would agree with you if this were to be the case that an individual can be corrupted, and that's the case. So if there was just one person, one emperor, whatever you want to call that, one despotic ruler, whatever, if they were to be completely in charge out of everything and nobody else would have the power, I truly, just like Stalin, and I truly would be, would be scared because the power and the lives of the entire nation hangs upon this one man, which can be corrupted. But in a state which I believe in, then there is just one person. There are a bunch of individuals, and they cannot, and they're not they're a collective per se, but their minds are not, a collective. They cannot be easily corrupted together under the same notion. If somebody does the wrong choice within this, let's say, council, and they start being corrupted, and they say, oh, let's not have these people in here, then the rest of the council can say, no, you're wrong. Like, this is not just one ruler deciding everything, and if they can be corrupted, then that's over. But in an entire council, if one person is corrupted, then that can still be manageable. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's called the USSR, and let's say fascist Italy were two different or different different situations, because how you say in the USSR, let's say. I forgot what they're called, but like the commissars, what they're called, not the commissars, but like the council that he had, that Stalin had. If they were to say, "Oh, we don't like you, Stalin. You're going out," Stalin would be like, "Okay," and then they all get shot because they actually have no real power. But in fascist Italy, as we saw in 1943, whatever I agree with this decision that they made is up to debate. That's not what the discussion is about. But they did vote out Mussolini because they did not agree with him to continue the war in 1943, when the Ground Council of Fascism voted him out. And obviously that all, fell apart, but that was because, the Axis is north. That's not important. But anyways, the point is that if somebody does get corrupted in my authoritarian state, they can be removed. So there is like a safe.
I know Grayson wants to move on. The only thought I want to leave you with that maybe we could talk about another time would be if you agree that like putting the power into the hands of more people kind of prevents that corruption, then I think a true ultimate democracy there's an argument to be made that would prevent more corruption than anything else, right? But anyway, let's give it to Grayson though.
Okay, yeah, I kind of lost control of that, so I'll try to.
We started having a good time. There was a lot to discuss.
Yeah, okay, well, I was going to make foreign. I'll just ask one question then about foreign policy because that went longer than I expected. But right now there's some concerns about how close our relation to the People's Republic of China should be. I'll ask you both: should we take closer or further or more distant relations with the PRC? Or just
Who do you leave the word to? Dude.
Yeah, who do you want to start on this?
Whoever has an opinion by first.
I started first. You can start this time.
Yeah. All right. Okay. All right. So the People's Republic of China. I think that we were actually just discussing this on my show the other day, and like I think that there's hardly been a government that like you can view it from almost any lens and kind of like call it whatever you want, like it has so many different confusing aspects. And I think a lot of people sort of create different versions of China in their mind that aren't necessarily like entirely accurate, because of that. Because again, it's this huge country, it's this huge government. There's a lot of like different elements that have been brought together in their government. They say themselves, we want to do something that's never been done before with our government. And in some ways it seems like they are. It's not necessarily good, but it certainly is unique in many respects. And so I think that causes people to kind of have somewhat weird views of China, because again, like depending on which lens you view it through, it can look a lot of different ways. And so I think that people tend to in general have just in my opinion, overly extreme views of China in many respects here in America. That there are some people who think that like China is somehow good, they're not very many, but those people exist, and I talk to them because I hang out with leftists, and that's confusing because that's not true. But there are also people that think that China is this like sort of supervillain world entity. And that's also not true. They're just another major world power, in my opinion. In terms of like relations, I think it's kind of crazy to say that we would cut off relations with any like major world power in a time like this, especially. Like I think that like when we posture towards like some kind of conflict with China, an actual conflict with China would only end in disaster for everyone. So like I think that China's a very problemed country, and I don't think that we should be giving them a pass for the terrible things that they do. But I think at the same time, like in my opinion, the answer is not to like cut diplomatic ties and just say we're not gonna talk to these people. We have to keep sort of like engaging in some kind of dialogue diplomatically, I think.
Okay. Regarding China, the thing is, the interesting thing about China, I obviously don't have the most, what's it called, the most positive views on China. I mean, the thing is, you know this, Grayson, like a long time ago, we had this debate about Russia, and like regarding foreign policy, not talking about domestic policies, regarding the U.S. and Russia, I'm kind of a bit of a Russophile, but the thing is, I don't like China regarding foreign policy so much that I almost like usually side with the US regarding China, regarding foreign policy. However, I think the thing is, the scary thing about China is that like the thing is, I will always be worried about major powers who usually strive to have some sort of indirect global dominance. I always will be worried about that, and that's why I've usually been more pro-Russian than pro-US, because regarding foreign policy, Russia has been more mild compared to the US. I'm not saying Russia's an angel now.
Comparatively.
I'm not saying Russia's an angel who like does nothing bad, like Crimea, what is that? But like compared to the US, who goes guns blazing in every single continent, I prefer Russia. Now the thing is about China is that what worries me about China is that they are more, how you say, if you look especially at Africa, they are more efficient at asserting their dominance over the globe compared to the Europeans and Americans, because like I mean, America or Europe usually does what's called new colonialism. Just go to Africa, say, here, take this $1, give me all those resources, and just take it. Now, what China is doing is that they're actually doing proper investment in what's it called, African countries' infrastructure, which actually is more helpful. So like by looking at this point of view, then China looks better than the Europeans and the Americans, because they're actually doing more help to China than what we are doing. But at the same time, we must look at what their end goal is. I don't think the Chinese are helping African nations because they love Africa. They're doing this to assert their own dominance, and that's what truly makes me fear China, how effective it is. I'm afraid how the future will look like, even now, how China, how their economy is growing compared to the US. So, but I'm not saying the solution to this is cut China off, because first of all, economically that's very stupid, because a lot of European economies are dependent on China to work. So like this is not how it works. Like, let's just cut off communication with China. Let's cut off everything diplomatically, economically. They would not work. But
sure.
But we must also not be too carefree, like saying, just another major power. I wouldn't really disagree with that. We must be more aware and keep an eye out what's China does regarding foreign policy, at least.
Okay. Thank you. So I have two more topics, if that's okay with you.
Yeah,
let's do one
or two more.
The first one, this is obviously just going to be a nice, friendly discussion. It's race relations. What can go wrong? Yeah. Right now, in America and even in some parts of Europe, there are these Black Lives Matter protests going on. And some of them have been getting pretty bad with rioting and destroying statues. But I wanted to ask you both, how should the government respond to these protests and or riots?
Mhm.
You want to go first, or you want me to go?
I guess I can go. And actually, no, you go first. No, you go first.
These protests are happening because of a lack of government response. So it's kind of funny to even frame this in some ways. It's like, what should the government do to respond? It's like the government should have responded to these problems like a decade ago. Ferguson was like almost, or like maybe 10 years ago now. It's kind of like insane to think that like we're still like that there's even a discussion about this stuff to me sometimes, because it's like we're still talking about the same shit politically that we've been talking about for years and years and years and years. And like, what should the government be doing? They should be fucking listening. They should be like getting their shit together, because like it's this has been like a ongoing issue for a long time. And like it just believing that like there's some way to sort of satisfy people that isn't like reform these systems is false at this point. There is no other way to satisfy the people. The people are upset because we're tired of our friends and our neighbors being killed for no reason. We're tired of these systems just being generally non-functional. We're tired of most police departments in most cities having like a 13% rate of solving rape, but like managing to like commit more murders than most violent gangs in most cities. It's just gotten ridiculous. And like, what should the government be doing? They should be shutting the fuck up and listening to some activists, in my opinion, because like for many years already, they've told us, no, 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 no. You know, you need to wait, you need to be patient, and nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. The situation has continued to get worse and worse and worse. And this is by the numbers. This is something that is completely provable, that, you know, that this situation has gotten worse. So it's, you know, the government needs to really like get it together. It's ridiculous that it's taken this long and this much to even like make any progress at all.
Okay, yeah. So I feel this also will probably like turn up to be like the old argument we had about government and what they should do. Anyways, the thing is, it's kind of, when it comes to this protest, it's kind of hard for me to have a definitive opinion, because on the other hand, like these riots, which are by, you know, Black Lives Matter or sometimes other groups like Antifa, the thing is, by core, I agree with them, because I like we agreed upon, the U.S. government is not really the most effective one, and I also believe that, you know, both sides, Democrats and Republicans, should not be working as they maybe should be. Like, they're not working in the interest of the people. Let's say like that. Yeah. Sure. So yeah, by core, these riots, you know, are good for, like, I guess I could say, but when you look at it more, you know, detail what these movements are and what they want, and then the completely different what's it called discussion. And then there also is the whole thing about like, if you truly want to like make the government listen, like I feel you should. I mean, you should take it, you know, if you really want them to listen, maybe, yeah, writing maybe should be the right way. But however, maybe you should try to, you know, make the public domain, like make the government scared. Because, you know, when I look at this, like these private businesses have nothing to do with this getting destroyed. Because the thing is, like I said, I don't really keep much about American politics, because the thing is, I don't know if it's a compliment or an insult, but it's so complicated. Like, you look at this, and there's like a million point of views to look at it. I'm like, oh. So I just try to keep myself to European politics, mostly because I live in Europe, so I probably should care more about European politics than American politics, which is the argument in America too. biggest station. Anyways, but then what bothers me also though, what bothers me is because like this riot had now been spread to Europe. They're in both in Sweden and Italy. And the thing is, if there is institutional racism in America, I don't have a clear answer to that because I've heard sources say there are institutional racism, which is like, oh, that's a fair point. And I know the other says there is institutional racism. Like, yeah, that's also like a fair point. So I don't know how it is in America, but the fact is that in Italy and Sweden, I can definitely, especially Sweden, I can definitely per se there is no institutional racism. And when you have these people rioting in and protesting in Stockholm or in Rome, and they're saying, "Oh, the police are all racist." No, they're not. Like in Sweden and in Italy, the police are not racist. Like maybe there are a few, but like the institution in itself is not racist. Not like the Italian or the Swedish one. Like maybe in the US it is, but there's no point in having this protest to show condolences or to support the American protests. I can understand it, but all these protests are literally directing towards police institutions in Sweden and in Italy, which is just, it's ridiculous in my point of view. And the thing is, so there's, if you want to like protest, support what's happening in the US, and go ahead, but don't destroy shit, because they're also destroying shit now in European countries. Don't do that, because like, why? So like, I understand you're trying to support what's happening in the US, and you're doing it by destroying a private business in Rome. I don't see what the connection is there, but so yeah, I have a lot of what's it called, opinions about this. I guess some of them, like I said, by core I agree with them, but when you go into details, there are a lot of things that I don't agree with.
All right, so my first thing that I'm curious about from what you said is you talk about making the government sort of afraid or nervous, right? Like, which, sure, yeah, like I kind of agree with that. Okay. How is it exactly that the people are supposed to do that? And why is destruction of property not a valid form of that when we know, in fact, that it does make the government afraid or nervous? Exactly what you're describing as like a hopeful result. Because ultimately, these private business owners are going to be protected from this destruction by whom? The government. The government foots the bill for these acts of destruction in general in some fashion. And so, like, you know, when we talk about like making the government nervous, I mean, Target even came out and said, the CEO of Target, one of the biggest corporations in America, not a nice guy for the record, like not somebody who's like on the side of left-wing stuff in general, came out and said the store that was looted, it was just stuff. And it's not as important as the lives that were lost. And I think that like that's like when even the CEOs of these corporations are recognizing it, I kind of wonder why it's so hard for so many people to just sort of like accept that like maybe this is a valid way of doing exactly what you said, making the government nervous, making the government kind of have to like recognize what's happening here and not be able to just step back and, you know, ignore protests, because, you know, that's been happening for decades now. There have been protests about these issues that have gone ignored. So, you know, I think that, you know, the destruction of property, if you say again that you want to make the government nervous, I think that accomplishes that. And so I think that, you know, you should be on the side of that. It sounds like to me, I don't understand what your issue is exactly. And then on the other hand, I will say, like, just in regards to like systemic racism, I think it's very it's very hard to say that systemic racism does not exist in any form in Europe, given the history of colonialism, and the fact that, and the thing is when those things exist, here's the problem, okay, is that when those things exist in the past, and then they're not fully addressed moving into the present, because the problem has been a lot of our nations, and America did the same thing. So, you know, don't take any, like, I'm just shitting on you for something that we didn't also do. We wash our hands of it. We say we moved on, but we don't really move on. And I think that's the problem that a lot of people are feeling, not just here, but in other places around the world where some of these protests are happening in solidarity, is that there's this sense, and the government says we moved on, we don't do that anymore, we don't do these things anymore. But in reality, they haven't totally moved on. And when you look into the history of some of this stuff, like housing discrimination or things like that, I mean, a lot of places in Europe, and I don't know a ton about Italy in particular, but I can say for like the UK, like a lot of places in Europe have had histories with housing discrimination that are really similar to our history of housing discrimination here. And that's just changing the form of the racism. It's not getting rid of the systemic racism. It's just changing its form. And I think that's why a lot of people are upset in a lot of places, is because, and I think, you know, it can be hard to see that stuff from the outside. If you're not experiencing these particular systemic forms of disadvantage, it can be hard to understand them because you don't see them. They're literally invisible to you, right? Like, I walk around, I don't have to deal with racism here in America. You know, I don't get racially profiled at the bank. And so when people describe those things to me at one time, especially before I was as racially sort of like educated and conscious as I am now, like, people would say, oh, I was racially profiled at the bank. I'd be like, is that really a thing that happens? It's hard to even process that it's true, but it is. And so, you know, when people talk about this stuff, I think it's important to kind of like look into the situations that they're describing, because I think a lot of times there really is a lot of validity to what they're saying in terms of, again, these, we both recognize that there's a history of terrible systemic racism in European colonialism and American slavery and these various topics. Those things don't just evaporate usually, and like they tend to stick around in some form, especially if not fully addressed. So I think, you know, that's kind of how I feel about when people say that like they're experiencing this stuff. I think it usually tends to be true. I'm sorry to say, like.
Okay, yeah, well, as I already said, I don't know how it is in America, but regarding Europe, it's, I mean, regarding what happens, what the state or the government does, like, you know, on a public, you know, on a public situation, like when regarding a public institution, no, there is no reason. Maybe there are few individuals, but and most of the time, no, there isn't systemic racism. Maybe I heard about this in Sweden, a few accounts that like some private companies are less willing to hire you because of your name, because your name is, you know, let's say Mohammed, but that would never happen to a public institution, because no matter how much I dislike the state of both Sweden and Italy, by the way, I'm Italo-Swedish, that's why I kind of like I speak of both governments, of both countries. The reason, no matter how much I dislike them, they are not racist, especially Sweden. Like they're like very, very anti-racist. Like here in Sweden, we have like laws which I believe can even be like what's it called, misused. Like where what's it called, a minority can even like report someone and they get, you know, and they get punished for racism. Like if I go out and call someone, oh, you fucking, then I say the N-word, then he can you know, he can punish, he can, you know, get me arrested for it. So like there's definitely no institutional racism. There's like even opposite, there's anti-racist laws in Sweden, which I believe also are debatable because there are instances where these laws have been misused. Like someone gets into conflict, this person might be a minority, and he claims that he's being racist, and then he gets arrested for it. But that's besides it. But that's besides. Wait.
Misuse is true. Hasn't there been an incredibly long history of white people saying this minority did blank, 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 and getting them arrested for literally nothing? Like, don't you see any of this?
Let me
a legal response. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, like I'm saying, like us Europeans have definitely had a history of systemic racism. Like even Sweden, not that long ago, had its own, what's it called, racial institution, like which we studied different races of human beings and even taught it in school. And there was and a lot of people who were oppressed here were not specifically, you know, Black Africans or, you know, Middle Easterners, because there weren't many of them in Sweden, but the Sami people who live in North, which now have tons of rights, and they're not being systematically oppressed anymore, but they were being oppressed before. But that is history. Even Italy has had problems regarding, and I would agree that there is some racism, but not in the way you're talking. I believe is racism in the side of foreign policy that European countries and the U.S. is doing their own neocolonialism in African countries. But that's besides the point. But no, I would disagree that there is no systemic racism in Sweden or Italy. Then if there is in the UK, I wouldn't know, but there definitely isn't. At least on the public domain, there is no systemic racism in Sweden or Italy. And even if there is individual racism, especially in Sweden, that can be accounted for to be punished.
So when we talk about history, this is really crucial, I think. When we talk about like history and the way that this affects people and the idea of systemic racism. So if your family was mistreated by a government for generations, right? Okay. In like a really significant way where like maybe you weren't allowed to own property, or you weren't allowed to own certain types of property, or you weren't allowed to accumulate wealth by various means of these systems, right? Like the way that these things affect people. Then that means that you've missed out on an opportunity for your family to accumulate generational wealth. That means that like even if somebody comes through and says, okay, we're getting rid of all those bad laws, there's still a deficit. Does that make sense? Like there's still like you don't just wipe the slate clean and everything's okay. There's still a deficit if your white family was allowed to participate in the system fully for generations and accumulate wealth and power in the way that families are able to when they're allowed to fully participate in systems. Then the person whose family was not allowed to participate in systems for generation, just because you wipe the slate clean for them, they're still starting at a deficit because their family was never able to accumulate that wealth and power that sort of like helps to equalize these situations. And so when people talk about systemic racism, like again, when you just wipe a slate clean, it's not the same as like, to put it another way, like if you and I both served in a war, right? And I lost my leg, okay? And we both come back from war, and the government says, hey, you're both clear of any charges for any war crimes you might have committed. You both get like a small retirement, blah, blah. Is that fair? Or am I, who lost the leg, maybe need some extra things because I'm now permanently disabled because of being in that war? Like that's kind of the framework that I want to kind of restructure some of this thought about what systemic racism means around, is that these families, these people who have been disadvantaged for generations, they are at a deficit. They are at a disadvantage. They are not at a clean slate situation with everybody else because of the stuff that has been done to them for a long time.
Okay. Can I give a quick response? I'll do a quick response.
Yes, you do, and then we'll get to the final.
Yeah. But sorry, I almost started laughing at it. It's nothing because you said it, because like you said, what if we two went to war and I kind of saw you with the banana costume? Funny. Anyways, so I was gonna say, the thing is, fuck, I kind of lost my thought here. Yeah, but I don't know if this makes me evil or racist per se, but I don't. Yes, I do believe that history should not be forgotten, but we should not, how you say, bring history with us. To say, like I believe that these things that happened in the past, systemic racism, should never be forgotten, and it should be just so we can never make this mistake ever again, which I believe we will never do probably, but just make sure. But you say that we are now. I understand what you meant by systemic racism, at least in regarding European terms, because you say there is a history of it, and that must be paid for. There's a deficit, as you said. Now, I don't agree with that, because I believe that will just cause more tension, because it is causing more tension, because a lot of what's called white Europeans or white Americans say no, this in itself is racism against white people. Now, if I agree with them or not, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying this causes tension. I believe like just bringing this up. I'm not saying that this bringing up is bad because it'll make us white Europeans look bad, because like I said, I want us to remember this. But just bringing this up and making a conflict out of this is bad. I want us to remember this and work forward as equals within a nation to better our nation and to preserve our culture, no matter where you initially came from. And plus, like, it's kind of hard to debate about it because I don't really know what you meant but like I don't know what you want us to do. Do you think we should this deficit should be paid by having protests, or do you think this deficit should be paid by public programs towards people who have been discriminated? I don't know what you really want to be done by this, and that can be discussed another time. But I just want to say that no, I don't think we should do this. I think we should just continue to work forward with the past in our mind. Yes, those are my quick responses. But yeah, you go, Grayson.
Oh, okay, yeah. Anyway, this
One more topic.
final question is a question for each of you individually. First, I just gotta make sure, Kenzie, what do you identify as exactly?
Oh, I do prefer they them. If that's
No, politically.
Oh, politically. Politically, I mean, well, I identify as left wing. I identify as relatively somewhat anarchic, but like I think a lot of people are confused about what that means. So I don't like to just throw that term out there lightly, because if you just say that, people don't really tend to know what you mean. And so if I was going to pick like one ideology that I prefer, I think that the political ideology of the Zapatistas is one of the most preferable models that has been developed in modern times.
So, when you hear that, what do you think? What he's identified as?
Me.
And there's a point to this.
Wait, what are you
You
asking
think
me
when you-
now? Well, you're asking me
No,
now.
I'm asking you what you think when you hear what he just identified as. What you think that would be?
The thing is,
There's a point to this.
you said thing like you said that your first definition. I actually kind of forgot. You said anarcho. What did you say? Something? You said the first definition, one
relatively anarchic.
Yeah, the thing is, like you said, that is confusing. Well, I think your second definition was Zappat. I have no idea what that is, so like that's even more confusing. Like what you say,
Zapatistas.
I've actually never heard about that.
It's a political movement in Mexico. They have obtained autonomy from the Mexican government and have a like sort of relationship where they agree to certain things that the Mexican government wants in exchange for being able to basically have their own nation within Mexico. It's over 400,000 people now, and they have a non-hierarchical direct democracy, just a very autonomous kind of system that is very inspiring, and that I recommend that everybody kind of check out, because it's not when you think of a government or like a structure of politics, when you look at this is not anything like what you typically think of, and they're making it work for them, and it's grown for decades and become very successful. So that's my little spiel about that. And if anyone wants to again learn more about like my ultimate political beliefs, go learn about the Zapatistas, because what they're doing is one of the most incredible political movements in the world, in my opinion.
Well, I'll check out at least because it sounds interesting. Anyways, what I would say about the thing is, like I already said, I am not a believer in any form of democracy. Not only because, like, my first argument that it creates a power vacuum, which eventually creates factionalism or like a underlying power taking over, but also because I believe that people are. This is not I'm saying they're stupid, but regarding actual government policies, like those are a bit more, or national policies or foreign policies. Those are a bit more. They're a bit more deep. Like you cannot just make up your opinion within a few, just by reading one page. Like that's just the start of it, and that's why I do not. Like having a fully educated people on regarding social policy, so like regarding social science, let's say like that. Yeah, I believe that cannot be achieved, at least realistically. That's why I don't believe how you say democracy work, because it's a slow process. It creates factionalism. Some underlying power can take control. It creates a divide within a nation. I think it's not in theory it's a beautiful system, but I don't think in practice it just doesn't work like that. So that's what I would comment about your ideology. But I'll definitely check out what's called Zapatista.
Zapatistas, yeah.
Yeah. I'll check it out just because it actually sounds really interesting to know about them. Yeah.
Okay, now this is the final question. This is for Kennedy. I know I already know what Chris's ideology because he explained it. So what do you think when you hear the term classical neo-fascist?
I mean, just hearing the term, just period, like it doesn't sound great to me. I mean, fascism, especially here in America, is very bad. I mean, like I understand, having talked to you now, that like you have a slightly different view on what that word means, and that's okay. You come from a different political background. These things are different, for you. I would say that like if you came here and tried to pal around with American fascists, they would not have you. So that's kind of like, having now had this discussion with you, it's kind of funny like that's the term that you use in my mind, because like again, like my first impression hearing that term is like, oh God, what is this going to be like? And I was definitely worried that this was going to be a little bit more like a conversation with like a Richard Spencer. And not that we agreed on a whole heck of a lot, but like I say, here in America, you would just be considered a conservative, I think. Like, so it's
I don't like that.
getting to the end of the conversation. It's kind of funny to think about it now, but definitely Italian neo-fascist is not. It's not a term that I guess I'm always surprised when people describe themselves as fascist in the modern era. Is what I would really, if I had to like sum up how I feel when I hear terms like that. It's really, it's surprising. It's more surprising than anything else. It's like, really? Because it just seems like such a loaded term that I would never associate myself with, even if there was a movement that said like, oh, we're fascists, but what we really mean is this. I would still be like, can we use a different word? Because like that is a very loaded word, and
I've heard that
away
before.
from it personally, but
I've heard that.
But this has been a very fascinating conversation, Chris. It's been very interesting to talk with you, and I definitely don't harbor any particular ill will towards you as a person or anything like that. And I'm glad that we had the chance to discuss some different viewpoints.
Can I have a last word? So yeah. So I just want to say I also really enjoy how you say discussing or debating with you, because I also think that what you're doing is really great, because the thing is, a lot of, especially, I mean, especially in the beginning when I was younger though, I had this like picture of the left, like, oh, they just want to attack, they never want to debate, and I'm happy that that you can show that not all leftists like that. Some leftists can be reasonable and just have a whole discussion with other people. And what you said about the whole fascist thing, I like many times when I have debated with people, they're like, yeah, I mean, your ideas are not as bad as I expected, but you just change the name. I don't like the name, which I agree with. Fascism has especially because of their whole alliance with the Nazis in World War II, fascism the word has been degraded. And actually, how you say like this, like just like you said this Zapatistas, how you would check them out. Actually, if you want to see what my ideology is, I would recommend that you check out the party of the Italian movement called Casa Pound in Italy. I mean, I don't agree with them fully 100%, but they're like 90% of them I agree. If you want to see what's closest to my ideology, I recommend checking out the Italian party, Casa Pound.
Okay, well, Kennedy, Chris, thank you for joining, and I will say that next Friday, July 3rd, we will be having, I believe we'll have John Minutz on, and it'll just be me and him discussing. Cool. So, anyway, until then, I'll see you next time.
Thank you, Grayson, for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.